All right, my apologies, everybody, that I had to break this up into two parts, but hopefully if you did watch part one where we covered the top four decks, link for that will be in the description if you haven't seen it. You did appreciate the insights. We did go for over 20 minutes, so I just wanted to split up the videos to prevent a like 40 plus minute video. But I do want to take a look at these top 8 steel decks. Unfortunately, they all fell in top 8. Actually, I'm not too sad about that because I am a Ruby enthusiast myself, more so than a steel enthusiast. But let's go ahead and take a look at the top 8 lists here. We have Amber Steel. This one, not a steel song list, more like just a straight up aggro list. 4 Cinderella, simply for the Let the Storm Rage On and Strength of a Raging Fire. We are seeing this package be used in basically every variation of Amber Steel, which makes sense because this is extremely strong. I literally just talked about it when I was covering the Ruby Amethyst and how this interaction is basically checking all of the Ruby Amethyst 1 and 2 drops, more or less. And it might facilitate some additional adaptations for that deck. But yeah, Cindy on 1 into any of these songs is just so strong. Such a huge tempo disruptor for the opponent if you get this off. 4 Daisy Ducks, which in an aggro list, you know, you have to play them. But without being on a steel song list, like you're giving your opponent that constant advantage. So this is why I'm not necessarily a huge fan of aggro, because to me it just feels like you're all or nothing. Like if you don't win by a certain turn and you give your opponent all those resources, you have zero chance of basically closing out the game, I think, right? Because the control decks, which is what you saw ended up being in the top 4, right? The Ruby decks just end up dominating because you've given them so much advantage with the Daisy. So like Daisy is still a decent card. We've seen it obviously have a lot of success. The Canio's Mine deck, and it's being played in Amber Steel Song. It's obviously played in these aggro lists, but I just think like it is still a liability, and you have to be very aware of that when you're playing this card. 3 of the Mickey Mouse, which as a 1-drop is understandable. It's a card that has better survivability than something that like a Lilo. It's also inkable, which is nice. Having the resist +1, but only questing for 1. It can seem a little underwhelming, I think, but overall, you know, when you're thinking about the other 1-drops, I think it is, I guess, a decent option here. 3 Calhoun, so again, just counterplay against other steel decks and or other aggro decks. But, you know, I guess you could say this card also helps check a lot of the early game for other tempo-oriented decks, like the Emerald decks, which is why you'd want to play this. But again, into the control matchup, this card is very, very underwhelming. And again, the control decks were the ones that beat out these steel decks in top 4. 4 Docks, understandable. You're an aggro deck, and this is one of your main facilitators to draw cards, as well as the Rapunzel here. 4 of the Lilo, you know, the infinite resource, as I call it. Definitely one of the best cards out of Azeroth Sea for sure. This card is so undervalued right now. I think it's down to $5. I picked up 2 more foils myself during the Boxing Day sales for around 16 Canadian, and because of the no tax in Canada right now on air quotes children's items, I didn't have to pay tax on it, which is great. Anyways, 4 Smee, of course, best 2-drop in the game. 4 Piglet, a lot of 2-drops. But I mean, you're an aggro deck. I would think, I guess maybe not. Maybe you don't need to play more 1-drops. 2 is, I guess going pretty saturated on the 2-drops makes sense, because once you hit 4 ink, being able to play double 2-drops makes sense, because I think more or less you're capping out at 4 ink. Yeah, I guess, well, no, technically you go to 5 ink because you play Kita without the shift target. So yeah, you would go to 5 in some instances. And Kita is a turn skip, right? That's what Kita's in here for. But yeah, interesting 2-drop package. A total of 7 on inkables on the 2-drop, as well as 4. So you're on 11 on inkables already between 1 and 2. You're on 17 on inkables total, but again, you know, they're all low to the ground, so it's not too bad. 2 Baloo. Again, another card I think that will see more and more play over. Well, I guess the meta is almost over for this set, and we haven't seen what the next set's going to bring yet. But this card, I think, is pretty overlooked right now. If you watched, which was recently posted on the 20 Lore Pro YouTube channel, which if you haven't seen that, make sure you go check those out. They post very high-level gameplay, and Sir Ashtown is a fantastic commentator. Amazing voice, by the way. Very chill, super awesome videos. But if you watch Markoth's game against Noimnot, it was Amber Steel Song versus Ruby Amethyst. There are scenarios where you're like, man, all he needs is that Baloo and he wins the game, right? And so I do see the value of a card like this when you watch those high level matches and you realize the impact that Baloo can have on those games. This card, I think, like when you look at the lists and you're just looking at a deck list and you're like, okay, it's like a 1 of, it's a 2 of, why would I just play this? when you actually watch the games play out and how much, like, you know, redraw with Whole New Worlds. I mean, I know this deck isn't playing Whole New World, but you still redraw with Rapunzel, with Doc. You're like the one of Baloo. If you see it, you win the game like on the spot, right? And so like it's just another out for you. And I've talked about this in many videos before about these non-questing sources of lore being so integral in giving certain decks, right? Like Emerald has it now with Tamago. We've had it with Amber now with Baloo, and the earliest example I think was with Amethyst, right, with Goat. And everybody knows, everyone's been complaining about Goat since its inception, but they are very powerful ways for you to win a game that you don't have to rely on questing, right? Which is traditionally what a lot of other decks, aside from Amethyst decks since set 2, has had to do. 4 Lawrence, okay, this is like a big body aggro threat. 4 Pete, of course, to lock up the actions. 2 Pluto, not a card you'd usually play unless, again, you have the offensive pressure and you want to protect your board, but generally you won't need to do that too often. And you also have Blue as a bodyguard as well, which is another nice little ability in addition to its very powerful, when it's banished, gain 2 lore. Of course, 4 Rapunzel and 3 Sven. This card is insane, guys. The Sven, yeah, I picked up 4 copies once I was playing like the budget Emerald Amber deck that I was just messing around with, and the Sven was like the best card in that deck. Like the card is insane. It quests for 2 as well, and it's a 4-cost inkable 3. This card is very good. I would play 4. Like this card is very, very good. 3 Kita for the turn skip, and then the double songs on the Storm Rage and Strength. So overall, nice list. Like you play Sven, man, you're readying up your Piglet, right? Just quest for 3 again. Like it's just so good. You're readying up Smee, prevent the damage. You're readying up Lawrence, prevent the damage. Like it's just ready up the Cindy after singing to sing again next. Like it's just so protect call. Like it's so good, dude. Sven is a problem. Anyways, moving on to Steel Amethyst here. What variation do we have? We've got a Tinkerbell variation with no small Tinkerbell for the shift. We've got Trinabok followers. We've got Diablo Broom, so 10 1-drops. 3 Calhoun's, only 2 Snake, and 4 Mr. Smee. It's kind of crazy that Steel has so many good 2-drops, like Steel, like Amethyst Steel. Whereas when you look at a deck like Ruby Amethyst, our 2-drops are like, I don't really want to play Flynn Rider anymore, to be honest with you, just because it gets blown out so heavily by Steel. Only 2 Lawrence, okay. I mean, I think that's fine. 3 Crab and 4 Fox, of course. I do like that. I do think you need to make room for the Crab. I think the Crab is just too much of a high. Like Crab on Calhoun is just nuts, man. This card just taking out anything. What a monster. 2 Pete. I would prefer 3 just because we know that you are susceptible as a Steel Amethyst player to the Ruby removal. But it's kind of weird how this like psychological game plays out, right, guys? Because even I've talked about this. Oh, I'm going to reduce the number of Be Prepareds in my deck because I don't want to play into Pete. Well, maybe they don't need to play so many Petes because they know you're on less Be Prepareds now, right? So then they just don't play the Pete and you're already on lower copies of Be Prepared. But in general, just Pete locking up actions into Amber Steel Song and stuff is also very, very powerful. Instead, we're opting for more 3-drops in the form of the Right Worlds. We're quite saturated on 3. Holy, what is this? 4, 8, 11, 14, 3-drops. Okay, we got 9 and 10. So very accessible curve, right? 10 1-drops, 9 2-drops, 14 3-drops. 4 and 2 on the spread between Genie and Rabbit, and 4 Goat. Okay, so 10 4-drops as well. And then, of course, man, I'm telling you guys, I was telling you guys this since the European Championship, man. The 2 Bell is like standard now. 2 Bell, 4 Elsa, 2 Tinkerbell. Okay, no shift target though, so you're raw playing this out on 6. Only 2 Fire the Cannons. I would prefer 3. 1 Zeus, opting for Strengths instead. I can accept that trade. This is a little bit more ink friendly, obviously, right? And not being cluttered up on Zeus's. And then only 3 Friends. 12 Uninkables. Not a bad list. Very interesting decision though to go so saturated on the 3-drop curve. But because you're playing Crab, like the thing about Crab and why it's so good right now, guys, is it turns anything in your deck into a threat that trades, right? And you can't really ask for more than that. Like the interaction for Crab and Diablo, Crab and Calhoun, right? Even Crab and Broom and stuff like that. It's so good. I mean, even it can, like, not that it would really come up too often, but it can even make Lawrence a 7-4. That's crazy, right? Make Tinkerbell a 7-5, right? Probably not going to come up, but if it ever does, like, you're taking on anything, right? Except for maybe a Tamatoa. That still requires double challenge or 2 resources at the very least. Next up, we got another Amber Steel. Is this one a traditional song? Yes, it is. Okay. So we're seeing a 1-drop package of Robin Hood at 3, 4 Daisy, and 4 Cinderella. Okay. So a total of 11 1-drops. The 2 Lilo is what I think is correct for Steel Song. I don't know if you need 4 of the Ursula Vanessa. I think you could play 3, but 4 is very good as well. And 4 Mr. Smee, of course. I do like the Ariel and Gaston, the 4 and the 3. That seems like a solid ratio to me. 4 Pete's, love it. Actually, I don't love it. I hate it because Pete is a broken card and Lingering Floodgates should not exist, but they do. But it's a very good card nonetheless. 3 Pluto, I'm not sure how I feel about that, but protecting your early game, understandable, especially your singers once they've exerted. It makes sense. 3 Lawrence as well for the aggro pressure. In testing, I don't think Lawrence was as good in Steel Song as it is in like the more aggro oriented versions. But it's still a 3 cost card that can sing the 3 cost items, and it's a big body that quests for 2, and it's a good heal target for Rapunzel, right? So it has a lot going for it, and I guess technically the Pluto is too. Like Pluto take damage, heal it with Rapunzel, it's back to a 5/5. You've drawn cards from the Rapunzel. Pretty solid interaction overall. I am a fan of the Robin Hood package in Steel Song as well. 2 Gontus, decent. Whether or not you want to play this is totally up to you, but the goal is that you drop this Gontu after you've cleared out the board with the Steel Songs, and you just have a huge questing threat on board, and your opponent's struggling to answer your singers. Now they have to answer this big Gontu because it's going to quest for 4 and win them the game. We've got a very consistent, I guess you can say, song package. 4 Storm, 4 Strength, 4 Zeus, 4 Wheel or A Whole New World. Okay, no World's Greatest Criminal Mind, nothing like that, just going straight gas. And yeah, a pretty consistent list. Can't say anything bad about it, right? I do think the 2 Lilo is good, but that's the only 2 of in the deck. Well, sorry, and the Gontus. Everything else is 3 or 4 of, so a very consistent list. Yeah, Freddy, great job. 16 Uninkables. Very big fan of this deck list. And then what is probably the most spiciest list in the top 8, saving the best for last. The Amethyst Steel Return of Jafar. This guy's ready for set 7, whatever. I think it was set 7, right? I myself I've picked up my 4th foil copy of Jafar Striking Illusionist just because I think we might finally get some good Jafar shift targets, which would be great. But yeah, you can see that playing the 2-drop Jafar here, while it is good, it would have been much better as a 2/3 because this card just gets blown out by all of the steel removal, right? Which is unfortunate. It does play around the brawls though, so it has a better matchup into Ruby. Nonetheless, here we have Aladdin on 1, the 1/3. Not that you'd really want to use this as shift, I can't imagine, because you value this card as a card itself. You don't want to just shift over it necessarily. But this Aladdin has really fallen off ever since Bucky was errated, and I do think this card is being overlooked. This card just banishes an item when it quests, right? And this is a great check to the Sapphire decks that would normally give Steel decks trouble. So you drop this, and you can start outing the Popsicles before they hear them quest with it, right? Especially if you are able to shift it early, right? And especially if you're on the draw, it's a great disruptor. And you do play a couple of locations, so you can facilitate that potentially. I mean, it's a hard thing to pull off. It's probably like never really gonna happen because you need like very specific cards, and they're only at 4 ofs in the deck. So the odds that you have this Aladdin, and a location all in one to out a very specific scenario of your opponent having an item, it's just too much of a specific scenario. But if it does ever come up, it could potentially win you the game, because that one disruption preventing the Hiram on like 3 or 4 for getting the item draw is potentially a game-winning play. Anyways, moving on here, for Robin Hood for the shift, like that, we are seeing Blue Fairy, so this is a Blue Fairy centric list. And yeah, it's all synergy, right? Aladdin potentially shift, Robin Hood shift, Jafar double shift, right, into triple shift. Well, single shift into double shift is what I should say. Not that you'd really shift this and then shift this on top of this. You just lose so much cards. But if you have Blue Fairy up, maybe you don't mind. Jim Hawkins into Jim Hawkins. Okay, how many uninkables in total? 12. So yeah, you can afford to play 4 of these ones for sure. Aladdin, the 3 Pete's, the only non-shift oriented target. So this list is very, very like, to the point. Everything they're playing here, aside from Blue Fairy and the Pete, are just either a shift target or the shift card itself, which is very interesting in terms of its characters. And then you have 4 Friends, 4 Storm, 4 Whole New Worlds, 1 of the Bayou, and for library. So yeah, that makes sense. Library over castle, because if you put stuff here and exert it, when your opponent banishes stuff, if your Jafar is exerted, the library draws you cards, and then you gain lore off of the Jafar. So yeah, interesting list overall. For the draw engines, you know, Blue Fairy, I guess this Jafar, Robin Hood when it's banished, Friends, Storm, Whole New World, Bayou, and Library. Yeah, I mean, just, you know, gaining 7 off of the Whole New World interaction here is still just, like, really good, right? No Fire the Cannons, just... I like this list, man. I want to play this. This looks fun. And it looks like it's consistent enough that it could work. So yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, man, it's, I don't know. I feel sorry for the steel decks, but at the same time, like, I don't like Amber Steel Song. I just think Amber Steel Song is such a broken deck. Like, you guys think Bucky, like, Bucky was broken. Like, the line of plays that you could facilitate with Bucky was broken for sure. But I've been saying this since set 1. If you get, well, I mean, okay, this is not the Steel Song list, but if you get, you know, turn 1 Robin Hood or turn 1 Queen when they used to play that, or turn 1 Stitch before all these other shift cards were out, and they get the turn 2, turn 3 shift into Sing Whole New World, it's almost impossible to come back from that, especially if they were on the play. Like, the amount of advantage they generate, and because you're, like, it actually works against you, right? Because you're behind on tempo, you're behind on ink, you're the one playing catch up, constantly reacting to their board, you have the extra card for the draw, and then you just lose it to the Whole New World anyways. So, like, it's amazing to me that they think that Bucky was so much of a problem that it required an errata, which I can understand, because that deck is much more, like, that deck is much more apparent in its oppression because it makes you discard, whereas this deck is more overtly, is that the right word? Covertly oppressive in what it aims to do. Like, if you've played against Steel Song, you know how annoying this deck can be, right? Oh, I'm just going to play out a bunch of my singers, I'm singing all of my stuff, and I have a board and you don't, and then I just reset all of the advantage with a Whole New World. That's unfair. That's actually, and I've talked about a Whole New World needing to be banned for a long time. Like, this card is so broken. It's been checked a number of different times throughout the format for sure, but the fact that Steel Song continues to be a deck that just dominates is I don't know. Like, I mean, it's checked. What's funny is, like, it's checked by the fact that it has consistency issues. It's checked by the fact that you might draw 2 Zeus and 2 Whole New World in your opening hand, and then you're just, like, screwed, right? But it's such a powerful deck overall. I don't know. I'm kind of ranting here at the end of this video. Not ranting, but just going over something that's not really related to the tournament. But I know people are going to maybe look at Ruby Amethyst and say, well, Ruby Amethyst has been top of the format. Like, are you just biased towards Ruby Amethyst? I think this deck is much more... I mean, I shouldn't say that, because Steel Song is definitely a very skill-oriented deck as well. It just has broken lines of play that don't require much thought. Like, you don't need to think about, oh, I have the turn 1 into turn 2, turn 3 shift into Whole New World. I just do that, and then I just have so much advantage that it doesn't really matter if I play well or not. But again, that being said, you know, Ruby Amethyst's consistency demands that you know how to play matchups, and demands that you know how to make correct decisions, right? Because you can't just be like, oh yeah, I'm just brawling and Medusing whatever. Like, you have to know what you're targeting, and it's always a tough decision, right? I shouldn't say always, but in general, against higher level opponents and in tougher matchups, you have to know, do I save the brawl or do I play it now? How do I facilitate certain lines of play? Do I bounce back my crab or do I leave it on board? Do I facilitate Fox by playing a 1-drop and bouncing that back and leaving my crab on board? Like, these are all very difficult decisions that you have to think through because of what you're going up against, where that's why you see good players win with Ruby Amethyst generally, and it be a deck that can be very hard to pilot and not greatly represented sometimes. I don't know. Again, I'm ranting here, but maybe this is something I need to talk about in a separate video. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up for this tournament. Very interesting results. I'm just amazed at the fact that all 4 of the steel decks dropped in top 8 to all of these Amethyst and or Sapphire builds. Or not Amethyst, geez. Well, I guess essentially Amethyst and or Sapphire, but also Ruby, obviously. But yeah, that's going to wrap it up for this video, guys. If you made it this far, thank you again for watching. Quantum is out.